Hello YouTube. So I want to talk about a skeptical challenge which has occurred to me, which I'm not sure there's been all that much discussion of this in contemporary epistemology. So if anybody knows of any work on this, I'd be interested to hear about it. So one of the things I've mentioned before on this channel is that I have very poor retention of the information that I learn about anything. Whenever I make a video or write an essay or anything like that, 95% of the information that I learn for that, 95% of the arguments, 95% of the reasons for the positions that I hold, I just forget within like a week. I mean, it just goes. It all just goes. So, the predicament that I'm in is that I have forgotten most of the reasons for my beliefs. And I'm not sure if this is a predicament that everybody else is in. Certainly, I guess not everybody will be in this, will have this to the same extent, right? Like, I have spoken to people who are like encyclopedias. I mean, they can just talk off the top of their heads in rich detail about topics even outside of their areas of expertise. It's incredible. I have known people like that. So I assume that not everybody is in this situation, but unfortunately I am, right? I just forget almost everything. So it's pretty annoying, but it raises, as I say, what I think is quite a serious skeptical challenge. So in epistemology, there's a lot of literature on the problem of peer disagreement. And so the question is, what do you do when you come across somebody who is an epistemic peer, somebody who is just as intelligent as you, who has access to just the same amount of information that you have access to, but who holds a completely different belief? So, like if you're say a moral realist, right, but then you come across other people who are just as well educated in philosophy who are moral anti-realists, right? How should you respond to that? How should you respond to peer disagreement? And on the one hand, you have conciliationists who say you should suspend judgment, right? Once you recognise that there's other people who are just as intelligent and just as well informed, but who come to a different conclusion. Once you recognise that, that should lead you to lose confidence in your own positions, and so you should suspend judgment. And on the other hand, there's steadfasters who say no, it's perfectly rational to just maintain your belief in the face of peer disagreement. Now, I know that I'm a steadfaster, but I've forgotten the reasons for that. So, yeah, I can't explain why here. But, I was sort of thinking that there's what I think might be a kind of similar problem, but with respect to the self, right? There's a problem of self-disagreement. So I've, as I say, forgotten most of the reasons for my positions. If you ask me, why do you believe X? Right? In order to answer that, I would have to go back to my previous writings or previous videos that I've done in order to uncover the reasons that I had back in the past. And I mean, sometimes we're going, like 3 or 4 or 5 years back in the past. I might not have engaged with these arguments in a long time. And even in those cases where I do know the supporting arguments for my positions, I know them only superficially, right? Like I can, I might be able to give, say, an outline of the evolutionary debunking argument against moral realism. But there's going to be lots of details there. There's a lot of back and forth about it that I've forgotten. So in the case of the evolutionary debunking argument, just to take an example, you're going to have to say different things for naturalist versus non-naturalist realism. You're going to have to think about how evolutionary considerations interact with like social factors. So there's going to be claims you might make about the evolutionary development of moral thinking, and then the social construction of moral systems and so on. And you're going to have to think about, well, is it certain specific moral norms that are selected, or is it just moral cognition in general, or is it normative cognition in general? You're going to have to talk about, like, how do we stop the evolutionary debunking argument in a specific context from generalizing to all other domains about which we maybe want to hold more realist stances, and so on. So, there's a huge amount to talk about there, and I've forgotten almost all of it. So even if I was able to say, somebody asks me, why are you an anti-realist, and I was to offer the evolutionary debunking argument, even if I could give an outline of that, I actually wouldn't really be able to defend that, because I have forgotten almost all of the relevant details about it. Now, here is the problem. The fact that I found an argument persuasive or unpersuasive in the past doesn't show that I will continue to find it persuasive or unpersuasive now, right? So, I can go back and look at arguments that I found persuasive in the past, and then I find that I've changed my mind about them, because I do change my mind. So the mere fact that Kane Baker 3 years ago found a particular argument persuasive, that doesn't mean that me now is going to find that argument persuasive. So I'm in this position where I can't now recall the reasons for the positions that I actually hold, right? I can't now recall the reasons for my beliefs, or at least most of the reasons for my beliefs. I can't now recall the arguments, right? But I know that I could go back and uncover the reasons that I had in the past, but I don't have any confidence that I will continue to endorse those reasons. So shouldn't this significantly undermine my confidence in a whole bunch of my beliefs? It seems like the best I could do would be to make some sort of inductive inference. Like, maybe I could say, well, I have in the past found that when I go back to arguments that I used to endorse, that I have had a tendency to agree with my past assessments. But I'm not sure that that's even true, because, first of all, I've never actually tried to, track that. And in any case, as I say, I know that I have changed my mind about a lot of stuff. So, for any position that I hold, right, where I can't now recall the reasons why I hold that position, right, there is some probability that I now would be unpersuaded by the reasons that led me to endorse that position in the past. So there's some probability of, not of peer disagreement. I know that there's peer disagreement, certainly if we're talking about, philosophy, but there's some possibility of self-disagreement. And I kind of have the feeling that should undermine my confidence in any position for which that's a possibility, or at least for which there is some significant probability of that. Indeed, it's I think the worry that I have is that I'm talking about the beliefs that I hold and the positions that I hold, but I'm not really sure that when we're talking about beliefs or positions where I've forgotten the reasons why I endorsed them, I'm not sure that they really are my positions anymore. So let's say that in the past let's say that I came to endorse a particular position. Let's say I came to believe that evolutionary debunking arguments were convincing arguments against moral realism, just to take an example. Okay, so now today, if you were to ask me, why do you endorse moral anti-realism, I was to say, oh, because of evolutionary debunking arguments. Okay, but now I've forgotten most of the literature about that. So I've forgotten most of the reasons that allowed me to justify saying that evolutionary debunking arguments were convincing against moral realism. So to treat that as my position, to say that my position is that evolutionary debunking arguments provide a good case against moral realism, that seems to involve a kind of almost like essentialism in a way, or it seems to involve assuming that there are certain aspects of myself, like certain aspects of my intellectual commitments that are kind of unchanging, or that once they're fixed, once I hold them, they're just kind of fixed indefinitely, right? And until I explicitly change my mind about them. But I don't know, it doesn't really seem to make sense, right? Because I know that actually all of my positions are subject to change. And once I've forgotten the reasons why I held a position, it doesn't really feel like my position anymore. So yeah, I mean, that's just a general skeptical problem. And I mean, then there's the worry of, well, can any beliefs really be shielded from this? Because my justification for beliefs about ordinary objects, or my justification for making inductive inferences to the future, or whatever, even these everyday sort of beliefs, well, actually all of that rests on quite complex reasons. I mean, so with respect to induction, I have in the past endorsed a kind of induction without rules sort of position. My view is that there are no universal rules of reasoning, and that's a pretty, that's a philosophical position that requires some defense. It requires arguments which right now I'm not capable of providing. I'm capable of sketching them out, but they wouldn't be, I don't think that they should be convincing to anybody. So right now I can recall enough to know that there are really powerful challenges to pretty much all of my beliefs, even everyday beliefs, even common sense beliefs. Right now, I can't recall enough to rebut those challenges adequately. I could do that, or at least maybe I could do that if I went and looked at things I'd written or said in the past, but I no longer identify with what I wrote and said in the past, in the sense that I'm no longer confident that I would endorse it. Because I know I've changed my mind about stuff. So it leads me to a skeptical predicament, right? Like I certainly feel like the grounds for my beliefs have slipped away, and I'm not really sure it even makes sense to call them my beliefs or my positions. So there you go, a skeptical worry. Oh, apologies, I didn't